Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to a preview edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me to break down the round 15 action coming up this weekend is my good mate, Sixties. Big fella, you weren't present for the NRL and News podcast with Quinn. And it was actually a pretty brief or erring on the side of brevity type of podcast for us. And I'm not saying it was your absence. I think it was more. Towards the fact that it was a very slow news week on the back of that short turnaround on the King's birthday long weekend. So good to have you checking back in. And how are you?
Well, mate, I've been receiving a whole lot of notifications about awards that came in as a result of that podcast. So I've used my discretion and ignored them. So
exactly.
So there may not be any awards that I've mentioned in the podcast next week because I've ruled them ineligible.
Correct.
Part of the podcast. So
I think that's fair.
yeah, look, doing okay, mate. Doing okay. We've got a big home game this week against the Roosters. It'll be interesting to see how the players respond to last week because last week was not good. I mean, from a whole range of things, it was an exciting contest, but we saw the Eels absolutely butcher an opportunity to win. But we also saw some really egregious officiating decisions in the last 10, 15 minutes. And, you know, we're not saying that the Eels weren't given ample opportunities through the game, but, yeah, it was some really, really unusual calls that were made. Can also at this point just mention as well that we'll be at the home of the Eels, Parramatta Leagues Club, on Saturday. We'll do a pre-game podcast from about 5 o'clock in the bistro. So come in and see us before the game. There is a reserve grade game that's on, which kicks off at 5:05, but we'll be in there with a special guest. I can't confirm. There could be one of two legend players that will be our guest. The club still has to get back to me on that, but come in, have a listen to us talking about the game itself, about we'll ask our guest about their takes on the game, a little bit about their career, and then you'll be able to head over and catch at least half of the New South Wales Cup game, and then, of course, the first grade game. But what a better way to kick off your football afternoon at CommBank Stadium than having a bit of a listen to a legend player talk about the game and about their career.
Well said, mate. And, of course, this episode of the Tip Sheet is brought to you by Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narrowan and Parramatta. We always shout out Greg and the crew for the fantastic job they do supporting us, and many thanks go their way. And on that note, mate, let's jump into our previews. We've got 3 games this weekend, as you can usually imagine. Obviously, the NRLW is coming around soon, so we're going to get 4 in the not-too-distant future. But for now, it is just Flegg, Cup, and, of course, first grade in the NRL. And we start on Saturday with a proper chronological sequencing of the games, which you don't see too often anymore. But 3:30 p.m. on Saturday, this one is out at New Era Stadium, Parramatta, so it is not at the same venue, unfortunately, but you might be able to just make it work if you want to catch all 3 games, getting from Cabra, then Parramatta. But Eels hosting the Roosters, and they look like this. At fullback, it's Zach Hunter. On the wings, Moe Alamadine and Bo Newens, Antioch Faitala-Mariner and Araz Namva in what looks to be an unchanged backline from the win last week. Arpa or Matt Hunter in the halves. Tinkin Brown and Damascus Nemia starting bookends. Sam Tuivasa unavailable for selection this week due to New South Wales 19's honours. Yaya Ayachi at dummy half. And Yaya also promoted in a roundabout way due to Matt Arthur not being available. And obviously Matt eligible for Flegg but playing New South Wales Cup. But because he is playing in the New South Wales 19's, Riley Smith is being called up to the New South Wales Cup. So this is the cascading impact of representative selection. We now move to the back row where Jock Brazel and Dom Destratus are on the edges. Saxon Pryke at lock forward. Good looking back row there. on the interchange, Will Lewis, Max Tupou, Tyrese Lakenny making what I believe is his Jersey Flegg debut, SG ball player in the back row, with Raf Stratus rounding out the rotation. They're taking on the Roosters, who, if I look at the Jersey Flegg ladder 60s, are sitting in 6th place. They are, where are they there? They're 2 wins ahead of the Eels. So this is a big game to jump the gap towards a potential top 6 berth somewhere down the road.
John, I went and watched the last time they played the Roosters, which was, I think, about 6 weeks ago, something like that, at Wentworth Park. It was a game where the Eels were started off poorly, then took complete control of the game, were absolutely cruising, and then there was a really rough call where there was a knock-on ruled, and I don't believe it was a knock-on. It was a kick down to the fullback. The ball rolled between his legs, took a rough bounce. At no stage did it appear that there was anything resembling a knock-on, but a knock-on was called 5 metres out from the Eels line. The Eels couldn't defend it. Then the Roosters got a string of points there and ran down the Eels' lead. It was a complete change of momentum, that one call. Now, the Eels should have been better, obviously, to defend it. The big issue for the team this week is the absence of Riley Smith. He's probably been, much like Matt Arthur in the New South Wales Cup team, he has been consistently the best or one of the better performers in the team. He is all energy. He controls a lot of the play. He is the player that is central to the spirit of this team. Now, I'm not saying that there's not good spirit in the team, but he's a big part of it. He gets around to all the players at key moments in the game. And so it'll be interesting to see how the team functions without him. Now, we saw a little bit of Yaya Ayachi in Pathways football in the junior reps, and that's going back, 3 years, would it be?
Yeah, two, 3 years at this point now.
Yeah. So, he's a capable dummy half and has been on the bench for a little while now. So, but as I said, for me, the key is how they play this game without Riley Smith. I'd like to think that they've picked up a lot of confidence from their play in recent weeks. Look, they will miss Sam Tuivasa as well. Have to put that out there because he's starting to pick up the form that we know he's capable of playing. So he's going to be a big out as well. Let's look. The Roosters can be beaten, but I think the Eels will need to be on their best form. But I'll back them in for a 6-point win here, mate.
Yeah, I think not saying they've solved everything, but I think it's pretty clear across the last month and a bit of football that they're starting to hit their straps. And this is obviously a disruptive week in terms of who's unavailable. But I believe the Roosters also missing a couple of players here. I'm just trying to see their outs, if anyone else I can recognise in the New South Wales or Queensland setups. But I think that's more from the Cup side of things where they had a couple of young guns up there. So again, the trickle-down effects are pulling from Flegg up to Cup for them. So, yeah, look at this team, and no Sam Tuivasa is a big deal. I think, like you said, he was rounding to some good form, the sort of stuff that we're expecting from him this year. After that, I think he had a bit of an injury-disrupted preseason on the wrong side of the preseason too, ahead of the start of the year. And then, obviously, losing Riley because of the Matt Arthur promotion to New South Wales 19s also hurts. But, yeah, I think they can get this one done. I'm going to tip probably a fairly tight win like you in the sort of vicinity of under 10 points. And if they can get that done, this is a big one. And there's still the Warriors. Sorry if I look at my wrong table there. Between them and the Roosters, there's still the Seagulls, Rabbitohs, Dragons, Storm, and Warriors. But the Eels are right. That's you're talking from 7 wins to 5 wins there. So there's only a 2-game gap, and this puts them right in the thick of it if they can get this result. So, yeah, back the boys here to get this one done. and that will.
Well, they are one of the form teams now,
and that's the thing, is that
won.
they are carrying form. If you look at that record, the Eels are 3-1 in the last month, and
they're 5 of the last 6.
Yes, 5 last 6, 3-1 last month. 3-1 is the equal best record in the competition right now across the last month. That matches the top of the table Raiders, third place Panthers, and then the New Zealand Warriors. So they're one of only 4 teams to be running a hot hand right now. And if they can keep it going, they've got some chances to make some real inroads in the coming weeks. So we'll back and get the win out at Parramatta, which then turns our attention to the double header at CommBank Stadium on Saturday. You mentioned that we're going to be there for the pre-game show from 5 o'clock, so we're going to miss a little bit of action in this one. It's always unfortunate, but there's the breaks. And the Eels in 9th place, hosting the 12th place Sydney Roosters. So we'll go through the Parramatta lineup here. This one has not been live streamed on NewSouthWalesRugbyLeague.com or New South Wales Rugby League TV, rather that is. So if you want to catch this one, you've got to get out there in person. Eels looking to back up from their, was it 4-point win in the end? 4-point win over the St. George Illawarra Dragons. Zach Sini at fullback, Lorenzo Molatalo and Isaac Lumilumi on the flanks, Jake Tungall and Morgan Harper in the centres, so that is an unchanged 1-2-5. Then at 6 and 7, you have Joshua Lynn and Ethan Sanders, young pairing of halves there. Then we go to the front row. Luca Moretti and Brock Parker are the starting bookends. Manny Luke gets a rare chance to start this year as he's been deputising Matt Arthur. In the back row, we got Dan Keir, captain of the team from one edge, Matt Dury on the other. And bringing it all together at lock forward is Charlie Guymer, who was a 19th New South Wales rep last year, playing on the edges where he had a great game, but was probably overshadowed by the 3 Ethans, Sanders, Ferguson, and Strange. I haven't actually, speaking of the Ethans, obviously we're getting a good look at Sanders. We're seeing Strange carve up NRL. I haven't seen Ferguson this year. Have you seen his name mentioned anywhere, 60s?
Not off the top of my head, but I haven't been looking for how he's performing.
Yeah,
so,
it was a hat-trick hero in that game.
Was he at the Rabbitohs?
He was from. Was that Newcastle and went to Souths, I believe.
There was something like that. Yeah.
So there you go. But it was a hat-trick hero pretty much this time last year in the 19s fixture, and then maybe injury struck him down. Not sure. But that takes us to the interchange. We already mentioned it, but Riley Smith making his cup debut for the Parramatta Eels. He's joined there by Kyle Castle, Will Latu, and Reece Alderton. So 5:05 p.m. kickoff here, 60s. Eels, one of the hot hands in this competition. They dropped the game a couple of weeks ago against the Jets, but bounced back with I'm not sure if solid's the right word given the officiating for both sides, but they managed to squeeze out a gutsy win against the Dragons. And if I look at this ladder now, the Eels, while they're ahead of the Roosters, what are they trying to chase down here? They're looking to get towards the New Zealand Warriors currently, who are sitting at 7.5 wins with the 7 wins, 1 draw. Eels at 6 wins. So they're 1.5 wins back here. And if results go their way, the Panthers at 7.5 wins, Warriors 7.5 wins, and the Dragons and Blacktown Workers Eagles, who they've both beaten recently, at 7 wins. This does get them right into the thick of that finals hunt.
Yeah, and we remember what happened the last time that the Eels played the Roosters out at Wentworth.
Oh, my goodness.
That 9-1 penalty count, and really a game that they controlled much of, and which made it even tougher to deal with the penalty count, was how they were still pretty much the dominant team, but just that weight of the calls took the result away from them in that game. It was, so they'll be looking to avenge that. But, of course, they're looking to do it without a key player like Matt Arthur. And that's not a reflection on Manny Luke, because Manny Luke is quite a serviceable dummy half. In fact, his combination with Matt Arthur in terms of bringing something different onto the field when he comes on as an interchange, he's very much a running dummy half. And, I mean, mind you, I think Matt Arthur might lead the New South Wales Cup for run meters for dummy halves, so it's not saying that Matt isn't, but Manny's probably a bit faster around the ruck, so he can catch a tired defence napping. Now, he's probably going to be asked to play longer minutes, but in having Riley Smith there as well, it'll be interesting to see how young Riley goes with that, because he's also a high energy player. Riley's a high work rate dummy half as well. Yep. So, and he's got that capacity, because Riley was even played a couple of games in the halves for the Flegg earlier in the
Correct.
year when the personnel numbers were just right down. So in being on the bench, Riley Smith can also provide some coverage in the halves. But when you had the likes of Lynn, Sanders, and Arthur, you had a spine combination that took the Eels to victory in the SG ball competition. They guided the Flegg towards the preliminary final in the same year. So they basically carried on their SG ball form into the Flegg. And in recent weeks, they've guided the New South Wales Cup team to getting 6 wins from their last 8 matches. So you talk about the Flegg team having a hot hand. This New South Wales Cup team has been on a similar role. It's you've got Brock Parker coming in as the starting prop. He's done that a few times. He's a very, very consistent player as well, John.
He is.
Very, very consistent. We obviously have a backline still, however, where the majority of them, a significant number of them aren't on aren't on NRL or development contracts. So we're talking about both wingers, one centre, the 5'8". None of them are on any of those deals. Ethan Sanders being on a development contract, and Zach Sini and Morgan Harper being on NRL top 30 contracts, and that's it. And then I think we're also looking at a forward pack where you have people who aren't on NRL or development contracts. So what are we looking at there? The starting prop, dummy half, second row, a second rower. So it's a fair number, John.
Yeah.
That aren't top 30 or development contracts in the New South Wales Cup team. So they're doing pretty well, all things considered.
Exactly. And I was going to say, we've certainly given them their dues across the last month and a half across Cup and Flegg, but it really should be stressed that both teams were staring down the barrel of wooden spoons 5 or 6 weeks into this competition or their respective competitions. And the turnaround they've made has been nothing short of phenomenal. So well done to both the players and the coaching staff in both grades.
And they've done that. They've turned this around at a time where the loss of players to injury had been at a near peak.
Mm-hmm.
And there are like about 4 or 5 blokes that are on the sideline for the Eels. So the Eels, 27 players only in the top 30. And of those 27, you got a number that have been out long-term injury or continue to be added to the injury list. Like straight off the top of the head, we could say Hayes Dunster would be in this team.
Mm-hmm.
Offa Hickey Ogden, Tony Matteelli. That's just like straight off from the...
Bailey Simonson pushes someone back down to this grade as well.
Correct. Yeah.
All that stuff adds up so quickly. And it's a big part of the reason why that back line in particular is significantly lacking in some form of top 30 or development representation. On top of that,
and Ethan Martin, who is himself outside the top 30 and development
and then Richard Penasini, Afmiller Stevens never getting a look in this year. So they've had to roll with some pretty hefty punches in the New South Wales Cup. And the fact that they're making a real push for the finals is a testament to, like I said, both the players and the coaching staff. So well done to Kalo and the boys there. And in that vein, I know that the Roosters are below them on the ladder, but they've got plenty. I mean, you look at the players that are going to eventually drop back into this grade, and they're not named right now because they've got a lot of holes in this team, actually. But I'd expect some guys to be dropping back from the extended NRL bench, which features options like Satili Tupanua, Michael Jennings, and whatnot. But even the guys that they've named here, you've got Dylan Napa, who I know isn't an NRL star by any means anymore, but is obviously very experienced. But Sua Wong, Zach Dokakai's got plenty of NRL games under his belt now. Tyler Moriarty is a pretty well-regarded young dummy half. And then they're missing a couple of New South Wales 19s players and Queensland 19s players and Blake Steep and De La Salle via. But it's still a good team. And
Yeah.
I'm going to tip the Eels to get the job done here and back up from their win over the Dragons. I don't know if they can get out for a big win. I think that's maybe just a roster restriction right now. They can score plenty of points, but when they do score points, they tend to let their opponents also score a few points. So maybe they'll win and win pretty solidly by about 12 to 14 points.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a bit closer myself. If the Eels were at something approaching full strength, I'd be a little bit more confident. I think Matt Arthur's a big out. Like, he's a massive out in this. And he provides so much direction around the ruck. I think we'll get the job done by about 2 to 4 points. But I think it'll be one of those games where the match is in the balance for a large part of this game. So I'd like to see them continue the win because, as you mentioned, the start of the season was atrocious for them. They lost their first 5. Flegg lost their first 7 games. If people want to put this season in perspective so far, I'd never seen a start to the season like that from each lower grade, to have them running parallel in terms of their starts, with losing the first 5 and then Flegg continuing it on for another 2. But yeah, I think they'll get it done, but it'll be a very, very tight match, which now brings us to the main event, mate.
Main event indeed, and it's the crowned game, or the crown jewel game at 7:35 p.m. on Saturday as part of what I believe is a full lineup. I haven't actually looked at the NRL draw. Give me 2 secs. I have no idea whether it's a full Super Saturday. So we do start at 3 o'clock on Saturday, which means all 3 games. It's Tigers, Titans, Wolf, then Warriors, Storm. That should at least be a good one. Followed by, obviously, the Eels and the Roosters. And this one is at CommBank Stadium. You can catch it on KO and Foxtel if you aren't out there live. And we're going to start with the Roosters, the opposition, as always. And they've got a pretty handy team, 60s. Captain of the team from fullback is James Tedesco. We've got Daniel Tupou and Dom Young as the twin towers on the edges there. Some tall pieces of timber. You got Junior Punga and Joey Manu in the centres. Luke Keary and Sam Walker in the halves. Jared Warrior-Hargraves and Lindsay Collins are a hard-hitting front row pairing. Connor Watson at dummy half. You got Crichton and Radley on the edges, and then Nafau White at lock forward, who's making a bit of a name for himself in that role this year. On the interchange, Sandon Smith is a utility. Spencer Lenu, Nat Butcher, and Terrell May providing the beef. Extend the roster, we mentioned some already, but Jennings, Tupanua, Dokakoi, King, and Wong. For the Parramatta Eels, Trent Barrett with a chance to continue to shape the team in his image, although admittedly with some restrictions given what's available. But he's gone for what looks to be, I suppose, a team that was going to play against the Dogs prior to that Mike Acevo injury, with Gufferson at fullback and captaining the team. Mike Acevo has been named provisionally, pending that Hemi, and he's on the left flank with Blaze Talangi on the right. Will Penasini and Sean Russell are in the centres, which is probably the best configuration of the backline we can get right now, given all the injuries and unavailable players and top 30 spots that we probably don't have allocated to the backline. And then in the halves, you've got Dillbags and Mitchell Moses at 6 and 7. Reg and Junior are named to start at front row, although, of course, we can expect, or maybe expect, Junior to switch back to the interchange prior to kickoff. Brendan Hands, who also played well against the Dogs, is at dummy half. Kelma Tuolangi, Bryce Cartwright on the edges. Jermaine Hopgood named at lock forward despite some concerns about a nerve injury to his back that was sustained during State of Origin after getting absolutely lit up by Liam Martin. So we have to wait and see if that's going to be any sort of serious restriction on him. Dejan Arce, Sean Lane, Joe Fungahi, and Mackenzie Makatoa named on the interchange, which I suppose adds credence to the theory that we had 60s, that Dejan, who did not play on the corresponding match in New South Wales Cup last week, was going to be used as a utility option off the interchange for Trent Barrett against the Bulldogs. Extend the roster, Greg Winnaroo of that kind, who's not named anywhere. So wait and see whether he plays Cup, I guess. Morgan Harper, Joey Lussick, again, not named anywhere. And if he's not injured, probably a pretty handy option for New South Wales Cup this week. Ryan Madison and Luca Moretti. Sorry, Luca. There. Match officials, Chris Butler, main man. Drew Altram is one of the touch judges. Casey Badger in the box. Whew. What I've done, where do you want to start, mate?
Well, let's start with any injury cloud that the Eels might be under. I guess in naming Morgan Harper on that extended reserves list, that it gives the Eels the option if Sivo is out, that Harper comes into the centres this week rather than Dejan.
Pushing Dejan out there, exactly.
Yeah, you're correct in the assumption that this is the team that would have taken the field last week, the actual structure of the team, with Dejan being on the bench. And it would have been Joey Lussick would have probably dropped back to New South Wales Cup last week. How that would have left things with Matt Arthur. Yeah, I've spoken about it before, that when Joey Lussick would be pushed back to New South Wales Cup, that potentially moves Matt Arthur to the interchange bench of New South Wales Cup, when I think a lot of us would much rather see Matt on the interchange for NRL and maybe getting his debut in the near future. So anyway, we have the lineup that we do this week for the Eels. So I guess there must be some doubt over Sivo, with Harper being named on that extended reserves list. But at least, as I said, it gives them the option that they can bring in a recognised centre, because as we spoke about, if you're defending at centre, it's not just about the speed of your movements. It's about the positioning. It's about understanding the defensive role and responsibilities out there. And
I mean, you're dictating what your winger does as well.
Oh yeah. And Dejan, it was just he was all at sea last week against the Bulldogs, so they kept going to that well, and it was really he. And we spoke about it as well in the instant reaction. He was positioning himself way too close to the inside defender and leaving too many opportunities for his opposite to actually get between him and the winger. So it was just a matter of maybe narrowing that space a little bit, communicating a bit better to the bloke on your inside that you're going to position yourself a little bit wider, force them to step back on the inside towards the sliding defender, rather than being able to get around the outside of him. But anyway, we're only armchair critics. It's a bit tough for us to make that call, but the evidence was there last week, wasn't it? So we do have that option, I guess, now that Morgan Harper might come in if there's any doubt over Sivo being out. But again, this all still points to, if we lose a winger, that we don't have wingers that we are comfortable to bring up.
Oh, and yeah, it's a tough spot to be in right now.
Yeah, and I mean, we can keep banging on about it, but we don't have a complete roster. And it's as simple as that.
And especially when you look across the lineup this week and you see Tedesco, Tupou, Manu, Young, and even Aponga, who is a decent young player. The gulf in what's available between the two teams is pretty stark. I think it's pretty safe to say that the Roosters have the ascendancy in the backline.
Yeah. So that, I guess, look, what we have to look at here is a Roosters team that they've had an element of inconsistency this year.
Yeah, started very slow, got hot, and probably stabilised a bit now. They've plateaued a bit. They're still good, but not as dominant as they were during that tear that they were on.
Yeah, but in being on a tear before, you know what their potential is.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not going to take too much for them to find that during the game. Now, the concern is that the Eels, like they did last week against the Bulldogs, at a time when they should have been asserting an ascendancy in the game, presented opportunities back to the Bulldogs. And if you're going to present the same opportunities to the Roosters, look, if the Bulldogs will punish you, the Roosters will doubly, triply punish you for errors. We cannot afford those errors. I mean, we can't play in our shell because the NRL is not played. The variety, the game in 2024 is all about teams' chance in their hand. So you can't go into your shell. But the errors that we made last week was not from going into the shell. They were just straight out drops or getting in each other's way. It was just it was a mess in that second half, and especially in that crucial period in the second half. So we just have to pay attention to some of the basics in completions and not hand the game to the Roosters on a platter. So my concern is really where we are at in terms of how we react to last week. I thought we would have been going in against the Bulldogs with a lot of self-belief, and it seemed in the early part of the game that self-belief was there. As the game evolved, it was like it started disappearing before our eyes. If we start the game, not even start, if we get any parts of our game this week where we just drop off in intensity, in self-belief, we're just going to be punished. So, again, Moses is critical. The work of the forwards is critical. I mean, you could literally list all over the park that becomes critical, and the reason for that is that the Roosters have strike power all over the park. So, I look. We spoke before about the Eels playing pretty standard football of win the middle and create room for the backs. I still think it's a case of that. It's just that now you also see that teams will chance their hand a bit earlier in sets. Teams will chance their hand at their own end of the field. Everyone's doing it. As I said, it's the brand of football that's being played in 2024. But still, when you come down to it, you make your job a hell of a lot harder if your forwards don't do the work. And we need the forwards to do the work for 80 minutes. And if they don't, we lose this game. It's as simple as that. Teams don't get the ascendancy or the confidence to go for their plays if they're being dominated through the middle. And I think what happened last week was the Eels held their own, maybe had a little bit of ascendancy through the middle, but then started to plateau. And as soon as the Eels forwards plateaued, it gave the Bulldogs the opportunity to get those shifts happening. We just got to be on top of it and winning the middle of the field all the way through the game.
And it's not like you ever want to give opposition teams cheap looks at the red zone of a goal line. But in particular for this game, I feel like territory is going to be key, because when you look at those wings and the centre, Manu, so Tupou, Manu and Young, the Roosters could be in a big offensive rut against us on Saturday night. They might not have fluency across the ball, shifting it left or right. But if they're getting cheap looks at the red zone, Keary and Walker can just kick, and they'll just go to Tupou and Young and Manu, and they might not score every time, but they're going to be favoured in most contests. So Eels trying to restrict easy looks at their red zone is going to be a key part here, and that comes back to the concept that you're talking about establishing some competitiveness through the middle. So I think that's going to be a key thing for mine. In that similar vein, I think Keary and Walker, if you can pressure them a bit, like not without breaking your defensive integrity and being reckless, I feel like their ability to maybe capitalise on situations gets restricted pretty heavily. Walker, who is a talented young player, but he's got some bad habits when he's feeling pressured. Like he defaults to a chip and chase or a cut-out pass very quickly. So I think that there's opportunities there to test that. But that backline is fearsome. Their forward pack is very good. The Eels in the front row in particular are going to have to be on their best to match Warrior-Hargraves and Collins alongside Lenu and May on the interchange. So look at this game. I think the Roosters are pretty handily favoured, in my opinion, 60s. It always sucks to say that about an opposition team, especially a home game at CommBank.
Can I ask you a quick question about the Roosters then?
Yes.
And because you and Clint spoke about this on the news podcast, Brandon Smith, he's got his off-field issues.
Mm-hmm.
On-field, are you happy that he's out, or
no, I'm not,
or more worried now that he's out?
I'm not happy, because I feel like, I'm not saying he's plotting it up for the Tricolours, but I feel like he wasn't anywhere near as effective as he has been in Melbourne, where their system, both on and off the field, obviously accommodated his persona very effectively. I feel like at the Tricolours, he's had a couple of good games, but on the whole has been a massive dud relative to that big contract they gave him. And if anything, more time for Connor Watson, who is a much more consistent performer and is finding a nice home in that number 9 or 14, whether he's working rotation at dummy half. He's been very good. And Connor Watson, he's a kind of ball runner, the opportunistic ball runner that can really cause us issues through the middle. Obviously Smith loves to run the ball, but he telegraphs a lot of when he's going to run.
Yes.
Whereas Watson will just take his opportunities as we give them to him. And we've seen that the Eels can give dummy halves opportunities. It's something we've spoken about this year about how slow we are off on the peel and our lack of wrestle in that regard. So Watson in particular, because Sanders Smith, obviously he's a utility and he'll probably play a bit of dummy half, but I see him also as the emergency option in the halves too. I think that Watson is a real danger man in this game. And I suppose too, Victor Radley, maybe if he has to get thrown into that mix as well, or maybe he's been opportunity to get a dummy half as well. But Watson is a spooky man in that number 9 jersey.
Yeah, that's the reason that I asked, is that I have great fears of what Connor Watson is capable of in that role this week as compared to Brandon Smith. I think Brandon just hasn't been anything like what we thought he could be at the Roosters, and obviously the Roosters are moving towards potentially releasing him early from his contract.
Mm-hmm.
There, it's you spoke about it at length with Clint on Tuesday night, so we won't get into it now. But yes, I think they are a more dangerous proposition with Connor Watson out of dummy half. That kick, the kicks for their wingers, I think you can almost lock it in that it's going to be a big part of their game. I think we were doing a reasonable job of keeping the Bulldogs in their own half last week, and it was those shifts that was getting us, because they scored a couple of long-range tries and made long-range breaks from those early shifts that they were getting, where we just didn't adjust well in that defensive line. And people could be saying, "Oh, well, look, that just looked typical of what's happened this year." But I think in reality, you can point the finger at they went past and through one particular player last week. And again, this isn't targeting Dejan as the loss was his fault, because he doesn't select himself at centre. Interestingly, I think the Eels have him listed on their depth charts as a centre, but I don't know how they are doing so, because he's been used probably far more in the halves and at fullback in his time at the Eels than he has been at centre. So, and then you have to question what the depth chart then looks like in the halves in terms of the top 30. If Dejan isn't listed as a half, what is the depth chart there?
Yep.
Are they, like it would probably extend as far as Blaze Talangi. I guess if they called Blaze a depth in the halves when they've been using Blaze at fullback, centre, and now wing. So, yeah. Anyway, that's for again another topic or another podcast. So, back to this match, mate. How did the Eels get it done?
Well, like I said, realistically, I think the Roosters probably end up with the chocolates this week. But if the Eels are going to upset the Tricolours, I feel, again, rugby league is a simple game at its core. It's going to rely on our forwards being competitive, if not having the edge through the middle. I think that's going to be a big part of this contest, because if the Roosters get opportunities, they're going to score. Even if their attack is stilted and it's out of sorts, at the end of the day, they can just kick to Tupou, Young, and Manu, and they're going to get the ball more often than they don't. So if our forwards control the middle, if our edges hold onto the ball, with the halves providing the right opportunities that we saw against Canterbury, I think that both Cartwright and Tuolangi can have good games. I think Kelmer is rounding into some legitimate form now. I think it's more than a flash in a pan. We've seen across the last few weeks he's starting to really find his physical prowess at its highest. Like, he's starting to dominate in that regard. So more of that, and it's going to be a big matchup for him because he plays left edge for us. Does Crichton play right for the Roosters? I feel like he does. No, Victor Radley played right when they were playing against Canberra, so maybe he's on the left edge. So it's going to be a good matchups either side, though. Crichton versus Cartwright, I believe, and then Radley versus Tuolangi. I think Kelmer can get the win there. I know Radley likes to get a big hit here and there, but Kelmer's been running the ball consistently, and I think that's going to be key for us, is looking at Kelmer and Cartwright and the mismatches there, and obviously working with Dylan and Moses. Backline, they just need to not tread water, but hold their own, minimise the damage. Mike has obviously got a bit of a question mark about his fitness, so I have to wait and see there. Hopefully he is ready to go, because that is as much as I've complained about Micah, having a drop off from him to the next level down now is going to be significant. And poor Blaze has to deal with. He'll be dealing with Daniel Tupou, I believe, because I remember Dom Young got tackled down the right sideline, so he's up against the experienced winger there, and Sivo's got Dom Young. So backline's got to minimise damage. Forwards need to maximise opportunities, and the halves and spine need to play in between those two factors there.
Yeah, for me, minimising errors is critical. I'll make the understatement of the year here. The Eels have struggled to play for 80 minutes. But like that leads into the next comment, which is that, I mean, not only do we need to play for more of the 80 minutes, if we can't play for the whole 80 minutes, we need to be playing for more of the 80 minutes than what we have been. We have to establish an early ascendancy and maintain it. Now, we wrestled back ascendancy against the Bulldogs, where we had it, lost it, wrestled it back, lost it again. So we can't have that to and fro of ascendancy. In the modern game, it's probably an impossibility that you're going to keep it for an entire game, but we just have to we need to make maximum use of it. And during those times where you lose it, you minimise the damage, or you just don't allow any real damage to occur. Now, that pretty much was what the Bulldogs were able to do, because at the time where they lost a player to the sin bin, the Eels had the chance to really take the game away from them. They just battled and fought hard and didn't let the Eels take any advantage of the how well they were placed in the game at that stage. And where you have those times where you lose the flow, where things aren't going your way, you just got to minimise what happens. And I think that's critical for the Eels. So look, we can talk about the individual matchups, things that the tactics of the game, that sort of thing. But for me, I think it becomes even more basic than that with Parramatta. I think we need to see the players getting in a real scrap for individual moments in the game, because we lost individual moments last week. We've lost individual moments too often during games this year. I want players to really fight for the full 80 minutes to make it. I want it to be more than effort, because I'm not questioning players' effort last week. I'm talking about, I want to see effort on effort plays. I want to see desperation. I want to see them, if the ball's down on the ground, I want to see that the Eels are competing for that ball every single time. If a player looks like they're about to get away from the defence, I want to be able to see desperation in cover. I want to see players that are throwing themselves for ankle taps or whatever they can do to scrap in moments that look like the game could get away from the Eels. I want to see them desperate to hold a player up over the line just to stop them. Look at that key moment against the Bulldogs last week, where it seemed like Dejan Arce was destined to score. And some might say he did ground the ball over the line, but the Bulldogs were desperate and stopped him when it looked like he was going to score. All these little moments, they add up. and I want our Eels to scrap all the way through the game, because I think there is the Roosters go into this with those advantages that we've just spoken about in personnel. There's no avoiding that. So if we can do it, John, if we can scrap and fight for 80 minutes and make the Roosters' job harder, then you might see those sorts of mistakes from the halves that we've talked about, that you talked about earlier. So the head says that the Roosters win this in about a 12-point margin, something like 30-18. The heart says that we can win this by a score of around 30-24. Then I have my fear factor.
Yeah, I was about to say the Roosters are one of the teams that when they beat us, they tend to beat us pretty well. And if we drop our heads early in this one, I feel like they can put us to the sword.
Yeah, and I don't want to talk about my fear factors, so I am going to hedge each way with the head and the heart this week. I was ultra confident the week before. I was confident against the Bulldogs, so I was ultra confident against the Sharks. Like there wasn't any question for me that the Eels were going to win. I was confident against the Bulldogs, but that was before we knew of the late changes to the team. If we had been doing the preview podcast, I would have relayed my fears of what was going to happen with.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Bulldogs did cheat in that game. They kept going to our weakness. How dare they?
Yeah, that's it. So, best on field. I'm going to go with Junior in this one. I think Junior will be a standout player in this game. I'm expecting big games from our halves, a big game from Gutho. I was so disappointed the players didn't get the job done for Gutho last week. So disappointed.
Yeah, 200 NRL games lining up with the King's birthday long weekend. It's like storybook stuff.
Yes,
they couldn't get. They had one hand on the win too. That makes it even worse.
Yeah. So, first try scorer. Let's see. Let's go with Sivo for this.
Yeah, I tipped Micah with the boys in the Para podcast. I know it's cheap, but it just makes sense. And then, in terms of the result, I think realistically the Roosters are pretty heavy favourites here. I think the betting line reflects that. But if you're going with the heart, it's the Eels squeezing out a tight win. I think I went with a pretty absurd scoreline of like 20-13 or something like that for the Parramatta Eels in this one. Obviously the Roosters kicking like a halftime field goal, something similar. So I'll stick with that absurd prediction. Fairly low scoring, which seems to be probably not likely. Best on field, like you said, 1, 6, 7 are always viable candidates here. But if you're looking outside of the norm, Will Penasini's been in some real red hot form. He's got a big matchup this week, playing on our right edge, and I think that puts him up against Joey Manu. I can't recall, but I hope he does match up against Manu, because if you look at our backline, that's our best bet at containing or minimising the impact that Joseph can have on this contest. If it isn't Will having a big game, then maybe it is. I mean, I tipped the back rowers. I think I went with Kelmer last week, so I'll go with Bryce this week. I think Bryce could be a point of difference here, assuming that his ribs are okay. Because if you've seen close up of him with his jersey, you can see there's a pretty big rib guard in there. So I dare say he's pushing through a pain barrier every week still in order to help this team.
Yeah, he's struggling defensively at times, and that's where you know that there's obviously a pain factor there. At the start of the season, when Bryce was fit, he was bringing big collisions in defence, like something that he hadn't really been renowned for. We're not seeing those big collisions since he's come back, and I think that to me that points to he's pushing through injured in games. And do you know what? That happens in rugby league, but we know that the Eels have had to do that big time with a number of players. We know Bailey Simonson played busted all season. So, before he stood down, we know Gutho was playing busted.
Mm-hmm.
these blokes been carrying injuries all season. So,
and I suppose further to what I was going to say is that reconsidering the best on field options, and he was very good last week, barring a couple of errors, but a player who could be critical to winning that middle is Sean Lane in the interchange, because we saw him dominating the Dogs of post-contact meters and opening up some running lines when he got a little bit wider of Mitchell Moses, but then dropping the ball. And he just he needs to get that out of the game now. Like, we need him to play clean football, because if he is, playing clean football and running the way he was against the Bulldogs, and he's back to being a borderline elite NRL player. So that's a huge point of difference if we can get him back to his best this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's do a little bit of a reminder as well that not only do you have the big game at the stadium for people to see this week, but you can come and see us in the Leagues Club before the game. So head to the bistro about 5:00 when we're there with a legend player. We'll put it up on our socials as we get closer to match day about what you can expect. So keep an eye on our socials. But the home of the Eels, Parramatta Leagues Club, it's a place to be on match days. It's a place to be, of course, any day, but especially on match days, not just with our appearance there, but there's always plenty going on in and around the club itself. So make your match day even more enjoyable by getting to the club before or after the big game. Our thanks to our sponsor, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Greg and the team have been such great supporters of the Cumberland Throw pretty much since our inception. So we give them a shout out every week, and for good reason. And mate, you've done exceptionally well. You and Clint did incredibly well. I'm ignoring, as I said, all those awards that are coming in this week for your podcast appearance without me. But as I always say, mate, go you mighty Eels.